This film begins with a bunch of people standing together outside in the rain at night, all focused on something. One guy named Vermin Perlassi talks about how in his group, anyone who doesn't follow the rules gets called dumb by those with more power. But the mean folks who like to put others down don't realize that those they call dumb can fight back in sneaky ways. Eventually, Vermin's group sees an explosion nearby after waiting for a while. Back in August 2021, in a small town called Villa Alcina in Argentina, Vermin and his wife Lidia already owned a cafe. They had a plan to buy an old agricultural storage place called La Metodica, which had been closed for over 10 years. They wanted to reopen it to help farmers and small producers in Villa Alcina. They figured it would be a big help because farmers wouldn't need to build their own expensive storage places. At that time, Vermin asked his friend Antonio, who owned a tire repair shop, to join them in this venture. At first, Antonio wasn't so sure because he'd had some trouble running his own business before, but Lidia talked to him and convinced him that if they managed the cooperative well, it could be successful. She even mentioned they could create more job opportunities if things went right. With Lidia's explanation, Antonio agreed to join Vermin and Lidia in their business idea. He believed that cooperatives could bring many benefits to the local community, especially since Argentina was going through tough economic times. Prices were going up, making it hard for people to afford basic things, and lots of companies were laying off workers. Once Vermin, Antonio, and Lidia agreed on their plan, they needed some help, so they hired Rolla Belland, the best mechanic in Villa Alcina. They hoped he'd join them as a partner once the cooperative got going. Vermin and Lidia then went to Buenos Aires to meet De Luca, the previous owner of La Metodica, to talk about buying it. When they met De Luca, he asked for a really high price for La Metodica, which surprised Vermin and Lidia. At that time, Vermin tried to be friendly and even mentioned he used to play football for a team in Buenos Aires, which De Luca seemed to like. After talking for a while, De Luca agreed to lower the price from 300,000 pesos to 270,000 pesos. Vermin was happy with the new price, and they made a deal. Without wasting any time, Vermin got busy finding people who could invest money so he could buy De Luca's cooperative. He talked to several of his friends and offered them a chance to invest in the cooperative he wanted to reopen. After a few months, Vermin and his wife managed to gather 158,000 pesos from investors. These investors included Eladio Gomes and his brother Jose, who fixed things for a living, Safa, who owned a grocery shop, Medina, who was currently out of work, and Carmen Lorgio, who owned the town's shipping company. Carmen also wanted her son Hernan to learn how to run a business, so she entrusted him to Vermin's care after his father passed away. With Carmen's help, they negotiated with De Luca again, and this time he agreed to sell La Metodica for 250,000 pesos, which was a more manageable price. One day, Vermin and Lidia decided to put all the money they got from investors into the safe at Villagrán City Bank. They planned to use this money, along with a loan from the bank, to buy La Metodica. After Vermin applied for the loan, the bank manager, Alvarado, called to say they had all the necessary information. But because Argentina was going through a tough time economically, the bank couldn't give out loans unless borrowers had enough money in their accounts. Then, Alvarado suggested transferring the money from the safe to the loan account. However, Vermin wanted to talk to the investors first, but Alvarado warned him that if they didn't transfer the money right away, it could take months to get the loan. So he advised Vermin to transfer the money that day to speed up the process, saying they could get the loan in just 1 week. Vermin, eager to get his business going, listened to the bank manager and moved all the investors' money into a loan account as advised. After doing this, he left the bank and bumped into Fortunato Munzi, the lawyer and mayor of Villa Alcina, outside. They didn't recognize each other and continued on their way. Then, on December 1, 2001, Vermin and Lidia were watching TV when they heard some shocking news. The Argentine Minister of Economy announced a new rule that said people could only withdraw 250 pesos in cash from their bank accounts each week. This meant Vermin couldn't take out the investors' money anytime soon. It would take a long time for him to get all the money back, including the loan from the bank that he needed to start their cooperative business. Because of some shocking news, Vermin suddenly passed out. When he woke up, Lydia tried to comfort him. She told him that moving the investors' money into an account wasn't entirely his fault. He just wanted to quickly get a loan from the bank. But Vermin was still confused about how to explain everything to the investors who trusted him with their money. On the other hand, Antonio, who understood what was going on, said he would help Vermin explain things to the investors. The next morning, as Vermin was heading to the bank to sort things out, Safa suddenly appeared. Safa blamed Vermin for the failure of their cooperative business. He said Vermin hadn't discussed moving the cooperative's money with all the investors. Hearing that, Vermin stayed quiet, feeling guilty about his quick decision. But Lydia, who couldn't stand seeing her husband blamed, stepped in. She pointed a rifle at Safa and explained that they had invested all their savings too. And Safa, not wanting things to escalate further, decided to leave. Soon after, Vermin tried to calm down Lydia, who was still upset with Safa. After the government made some surprising rules, many people went in front of banks to ask about the money they put there. Meanwhile, Vermin and Lydia were also at the bank, waiting for Alvarado to arrive because he suggested moving money into their account. One night, Rollo asked Vermin, Lydia, and Antonio to come to his warehouse to hear Marco's story. Marco is Rollo's cousin and works at the bank. He helped Vermin transfer money to investors through a loan account. There, Marco explained that on the same day Vermin moved his money, Alvarado met Fortunato. Fortunato already knew about the government's new rules restricting money withdrawals because of his connections. So, they quickly made a big loan in dollars to save themselves before the new rules came into effect. Fortunato even paid Alvarado so that the bank manager would quickly approve a loan application. Alvarado planned to use the money from customers' accounts to give the loan to Fortunato. That's why he pushed Vermin to deposit money into the account right away, so he could lend it to Fortunato. The next day, Vermin and Lydia hurried to the bank to talk to Alvarado about his partnership with Fortunato, which was hurting many people. But Alvarado tried to avoid them and quickly left. Since they didn't get any answers, Vermin and Lydia went home feeling angry and disappointed. They realized they were just regular people and couldn't fight against powerful officials who were causing them harm. At that moment, Vermin was so upset that he couldn't focus while driving, and they ended up in a car accident while trying to avoid another car. Sadly, Lydia lost her life in the accident, and Vermin was badly injured, needing intensive care in the hospital with a broken arm and leg. On the other hand, Rodrigo, Vermin, and Lydia's son had been away from home studying when he heard about the accident. He rushed back to Villa Alcina to be with his parents. The accident meant Rodrigo had to stop his studies and find a job washing cars to support himself and take care of his father as he recovered. Besides Rodrigo's family, many other people in Argentina are struggling because of the country's economic problems. More and more people are falling into poverty, even though the government is trying to fix things by changing presidents 4 times in a month. Unfortunately, the economic troubles also hurt Carmen's business, but she's doing her best to help out by hiring people who need work. This includes the Gomez brothers, who lost their money in a cooperative investment. Luckily, Antonio's small workshop hasn't been hit too hard by the crisis and is still running smoothly. A year later, Antonio and Rollo met with Vermin, who had gotten better, and Rodrigo at their home to share some important news about the money they invested together, which Fortunato took. They explained that Eladio's wife, Alicia, who worked as a nurse, had seen Fortunato visiting a patient named Marcus at the hospital. At that time, Fortunato was turned away by the hospital because he wasn't a family member of Marcus. Curious, Alicia looked into why Fortunato was there and found out he wanted Marcus to dig a hole 3 meters by 3 meters wide and 2 meters deep. He planned to use it as a holder for a swimming pool filter. In that moment, Antonio and Rollo didn't believe that Fortunato's hole digging was for a swimming pool filter. They suspected he was making a secret safe to hide the money he stole from bank customers. When Vermin heard this, he stayed silent, feeling like he had lost hope given his situation. This disappointed Antonio and Rollo, who had hoped Vermin would join them in fighting to get their money back from Fortunato. Feeling let down by Vermin's attitude, they left, reminding him that he wasn't the only one suffering because of the economic crisis. For days, Vermin thought about what his friends had said. Eventually, he met Antonio at the workshop and invited him and the other investors to discuss a plan to reclaim their money from Fortunato's safe. Unfortunately, Safa, who was deeply disappointed with Vermin, decided to close his shop and leave town. So, that night, Safa didn't join Vermin, Rodrigo, and Hernan in discussing their plans against Fortunato. At that time, Vermin explained that Fortunato had hidden money from the bank in a secret safe on a faraway hill. He shared his plan to break into the safe and take back the money that Fortunato had stolen from their cooperative. To avoid getting caught by Fortunato, they needed to act quickly. On the other hand, Carmen, who heard Vermin's plan, pointed out that counting all the money at the location would take too long. She suggested grabbing all the money first and then dividing it later according to each person's share. Carmen also suggested donating any extra money to a charity to help others. Everyone agreed with her sensible idea, and they decided to start investigating the safe right away. The next day, Rodrigo was assigned to keep an eye on Fortunato's residence, which also doubled as the mayor's office. Meanwhile, Vermin and the others gathered near the hill where they suspected Fortunato kept his secret safe. Rodrigo posed as a worker offering free plant care services to keep tabs on Fortunato's movements and alert his father and friends if Fortunato headed towards the safe location. When Rodrigo arrived at Fortunato's residence, he was welcomed by Fortunato's secretary, Florencia. At the same time, Vermin, Antonio Rollo, and the Gomes brothers headed to the hill to investigate the safe. Meanwhile, Hernan stayed in the car, ready to warn the others if Rodrigo signaled. Soon after, Vermin and his friends explored the hill, which Fortunato had cleverly disguised as a livestock farm to avoid suspicion about the safe's location. As they reached the top, they spotted a fenced-off area surrounded by leaves. Curious, Vermin stepped inside the fence, unaware that Fortunato had set up an alarm sensor. If someone crossed the fence, Fortunato would immediately receive a notification on his phone about the intruder entering the safe area. Meanwhile, back at his home, Fortunato was startled when he got a notification on his phone about someone near his safe. Then, he quickly got into his car and drove to the hill to check it. Rodrigo, realizing what was happening, got into his car and called Hernan to warn Vermin and the others to get out of there fast. At that time, Hernan wasted no time and yelled for Vermin and the others to come back immediately. Knowing that, Vermin panicked and ran without realizing he left his bag near the safe. As they ran, Vermin asked Doze, who was faster, to grab the bag. Meanwhile, Fortunato was getting closer to the safe location, but luckily, Vermin and his friends managed to escape before he arrived. Later that evening, during a meeting at Antonio's workshop, Rodrigo explained about the alarm system Fortunato used. It would alert him directly if someone entered the safe area. There, Carmen suggested they plan more carefully, now that they knew about this alarm, and also consider the time it took for Fortunato to respond to such alerts. Unfortunately, none of them knew how to open the safe or disable the alarm system, which likely used a password. Then, Hernan suggested they first find out about the alarm system used by the mayor. They thought they could find information in Fortunato's office, maybe in a receipt for the alarm purchase. Shortly after, they decided to assign this task to Rodrigo because he could easily access Fortunato's office. On another day, while Rodrigo was taking care of the plants in Fortunato's study, he overheard the mayor talking with Florencia about Alvarado and his wife, who had died at home from a gas leak. Shortly after, Fortunato went to offer his condolences to his friend who had helped him make a lot of money. When Florencia left the room to use the bathroom, Rodrigo took the chance to sneak a look at the mayor's purchase files until he found a receipt for the alarm system. After finding out which alarm system Fortunato had bought, Vermin went to the alarm office, pretending to be a customer. A salesman named Louis explained that the alarm used an infrared system to detect movement or pressure. If the sensor detected anything, it would send a notification to the owner's phone within 2 minutes so they could check it. Louis mentioned that the alarm's battery lasted for 48 hours. If it reached 50% capacity, the alarm would signal and then automatically switch to using electricity. This way, valuable items would have double security. Meanwhile, Rodrigo, who was starting to like Florencia, visited Fortunato's residence. There, he gave Florencia a plant and asked her out on a date. Florencia accepted the plant, but turned down the date because she already had a boyfriend. Rodrigo didn't say anything and went home afterward. Then, after learning about Fortunato's alarm system, Vermin and his friends had another meeting because they hadn't found a way to open the safe without setting off the alarm. That evening, Vermin was at home thinking about Lydia. Then he suddenly remembered a scene from a movie they had watched together. It was about a character who stole valuable items from a place with a tight security system similar to Fortunato's alarm. In the movie, the character repeatedly triggered the alarm until the guard thought it was broken and turned it off. Vermin wasted no time. He woke up Rodrigo, who was sleeping, and called Rollo and Antonio to discuss a plan to break into Fortunato's safe using the movie's method. There, Vermin explained that he would set off the alarm many times until Fortunato thought it was broken and connected it directly to the power line. After ensuring the security system was powered by electricity, they planned to disrupt the electricity by causing an explosion at the Villa Alcina electricity substation during a storm. This way, people would think the substation exploded from being struck by lightning. When Antonio heard this plan, he thought Vermin was being too daring, knowing it could get them in trouble with the police. However, Antonio realized there was no better way to quickly access the money in Fortunato's safe, so he reluctantly agreed to Vermin's plan. At the next meeting, Vermin explained they would deactivate the alarm by cutting the cable connected directly to the safe. Once Fortunato went to inspect, they would quickly reconnect the cut cable to activate the alarm again. According to Vermin's plan, they would repeat this process multiple times until Fortunato assumed the alarm battery was damaged and eventually connected the safe directly to the power line. Once Fortunato connects the safe directly to the power line, Vermin and the others plan to destroy the power generator at Villa Alcina. This will completely disable the safe system, allowing them to open it and take all the money without Fortunato knowing. Hernan suggested cutting the alarm cable far away from the safe to avoid suspicion. He plans to use a metal detector to locate the cable connected to the mayor's safe on the hill. A few days later, Vermin and Antonio began their operation by using a metal detector borrowed by Hernan to find the underground cable connected to the safe. After locating it, they cut the electrical cable. Not long after, Fortunato received a notification about the alarm system failure and hurried to check the hill. At the same time, Vermin quickly reconnected the electrical cable to avoid suspicion. Because of the strange issues with the safe's alarm, Fortunato contacted Louis, the alarm salesman, to check the system. When Louis arrived, Fortunato suddenly accused him of causing the malfunction to steal the money from the safe. Terrified, Louis tried to explain he had no intention of stealing and offered to inspect the electrical cable for free to prove it. Despite Fortunato's anger and gunshots, he eventually believed Louis and went with him to check the connections. Secretly, Vermin and his friends hid behind a bush, keeping an eye on the mayor. After Louis checked the main cable connection to the safe and found nothing wrong, he suggested the alarm might have gone off due to unstable electricity or a damaged battery. But at that time, Fortunato didn't seem keen on replacing the battery since the alarm system was working fine again. To trick Fortunato into removing the alarm battery, Vermin repeatedly cut off and reconnected the safe's electricity over several days. This made Fortunato busy checking the safe during meetings and even late at night. As Fortunato's frustration grew from constantly checking the safe, he became increasingly annoyed by the alarm notifications. Unable to find any issues with the electricity supply, he assumed the battery was damaged. Without thoroughly investigating, he decided to remove the alarm battery, falling into Vermeen's plan. After successfully getting Fortunato to remove the alarm battery, Vermeen and his friends felt relieved and moved on to their next plan, which was to blow up the electricity substation. At that time, Antonio had everything prepared and showed Vermeen and Rollo an abandoned warehouse, where he kept a bulldozer and 3 boxes of dynamite weighing 90 kilograms, which they would use for the explosion. Meanwhile, at Fortunato's residence, Florencia grew suspicious of Rodrigo's behavior. She noticed he wasn't a gardener, yet Fortunato kept receiving alarm notifications and leaving his office whenever Rodrigo was around. However, Rodrigo stayed silent, worried his plans against the mayor would be exposed. Seeing Rodrigo's silence, Florencia considered reporting her suspicions to Fortunato, but decided against it when she saw him rushing to check his safe after another alarm notification. On the other hand, Rodrigo, fearing Florencia would report him to Fortunato, finally opened up and told her everything. He revealed the collaboration between the mayor and Alvarado to steal money from bank customers, including his family's involvement and their struggles during the economic crisis. He also shared how Alvarado's actions led to Lidia's death in an accident during a protest. However, Florencia, initially annoyed with Rodrigo, began to empathize, especially after realizing her own family had been victims of Alvarado and Fortunato's actions. They had money in the same bank as Rodrigo's family. Meanwhile, Antonio, Medina, and the Gomez brothers pretended to be electricity workers, repairing lines along the road Fortunato would pass on his way to the hill where his safe was located. When Fortunato approached, thinking they were real workers, Antonio explained they were fixing the frequent electrical issues in the area. Upon hearing Antonio's explanation, Fortunato believed the frequent power outages in the area were causing the alarm notifications from his safe. Without suspecting Antonio's team, Fortunato left them, unaware they had tricked him. At that time, they also realized Fortunato must have removed the alarm battery because he checked the safe shortly after the power was cut, which wouldn't affect battery-powered alarms. This suggested he connected the alarm directly to the power line. That evening, during a meeting at Antonio's workshop, Rodrigo confessed he told Florencia about their plans because she suspected him. Vermeen, hearing this, decided to cancel their plan to steal from Fortunato's safe. He didn't want to risk losing anyone else, especially if Florencia told Fortunato, potentially leading to legal trouble. Even though Fortunato wouldn't go to the police, Vermeen worried he might move the money somewhere else after Florencia's report, ruining their plans. Rodrigo tried to reassure his father, saying Florencia wouldn't reveal their plans since her family also suffered from the economic crisis due to Alvarado's actions. But Vermeen refused to listen and decided to cancel the mission, despite the disagreement from the others. The next day, as a storm was predicted, the group planned to break into the safe. Vermeen once again refused to go through with it. However, Rodrigo didn't care about his father's decision and chose to proceed with Antonio and the others. That night, Antonio would dig up the road Fortunato passed, hoping to delay him. Meanwhile, they would blow up the city's electricity substations using dynamite to cause chaos and distract from their plan. Realizing his son and friends were determined to continue the mission, Vermeen changed his mind and joined them at the warehouse. At that moment, Antonio and the others were happy to have him back, and Vermeen explained they would start the mission with a phone signal. If there was interference, they'd use a beacon to continue as planned. After the meeting, they headed to their positions, while Carmen stayed at the warehouse. On the rainy night, they split into groups. Antonio used a bulldozer to dig a hole in the road, while Medina and Rollo set off dynamite at the electricity substation. Vermeen and the rest waited on the hill to retrieve the money once the power was out. Meanwhile, Fortunato was at a party in the mayor's building. Soon after, Medina and Rollo faced a problem at the electricity substation because the remote control car for the dynamite was hard to control due to the electric field. To avoid failure, Rollo ignited the dynamite and used a rock to press the gas pedal, making it look like the car crashed into the substation and caused an explosion. This cut the power in Villa Alcina as planned. Meanwhile, Fortunato received an alarm from his safe, but ignored it, thinking the power outage was due to a lightning strike. He believed the power would come back soon, reactivating the safe's security system. Vermine and the others, aware of the substation explosion, hurried to the hilltop. They used a welding machine to break into the safe and took all the money. A little while later, Fortunato called the city's electricity officer to find out why the power went out. The officer told him that someone had blown up the electricity station. Worried, Fortunato hurried to check his safe on the hill because he realized someone might have turned off the power to steal his money. Meanwhile, Vermine and his friends finished their job and quickly left before Fortunato arrived. When Fortunato got to the hill, he was shocked to find his safe broken into and burned. At that time, he was really upset about the money that was gone. On the other hand, Vermine and his crew regrouped and were happy with the money they got. To keep it safe, Vermine decided to split it in two and go separate ways for a while before meeting up again in a warehouse to avoid suspicion. Soon after, they gave some of the money to Hernan, who was driving alone, and Vermine took the rest to Carmen at the warehouse. Then, when they got to the warehouse, Vermine and his friends began counting their money. But Hernan wasn't there, and it turned out he took off with the money they'd given him to hold. Carmen couldn't reach her son and realized he resented her for always bossing him around and never listening to him. Because of this, Vermine and the others had to let go of that money and focus on what they had. Now they decided to use some of the money they had saved up to start a cooperative. After preparing for a long time, they finally opened the La Metodica Cooperative on September 14, 2003, which also happened to be Lydia's birthday. This cooperative helped improve the economy of Villa Alcina and the surrounding area. It hired 57 workers and assisted farmers and ranchers who were struggling to start their own businesses. At the end of the film, it's shown that Florencia and Rodrigo's relationship is getting stronger, and they decide to get married. Several years later, Vermine is fishing with his granddaughter by the lake. He thinks to himself that, in his opinion, stupid people are those who never learn to overcome challenges because hard work and perseverance always pay off in the end. Meanwhile, Fortunato goes to Antonio's simple workshop to get help changing his flat tire. When Antonio sees the mayor coming, he intentionally gives him a drink with a dirty straw. Without suspecting anything, Fortunato accepts the drink and drinks it. Antonio feels happy, as if he's gotten revenge on the corrupt mayor. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is don't mess with folks who've got a plan, because even if they stumble in the rain, they'll still make a splash in the end.